I want to thank you very much for letting me give this sermon. It'll be my 22nd sermon. It's going to be on 3 books of the Old Testament. 31st book, Obadiah. 32 book is Jonah. And 33 book is Micah. I want to thank this, basically Jesus Social Hour. This is all under Romans7.org. It's a 501c nonprofit helping, we figure, over 9 million poor souls in the United States and trying to fight for affordable housing, training for veterans, elderly help, and working through federal grants, especially for the beginning of next year. But each week, every Tuesday, we give our broadcast on 29 books of the Old Testament, 36 of the 27 books of the New Testament, 39 books of the Old Testament, 66 books total in the Bible, and plus we're going to add the coveted book of Enoch, as our crown. So we'll go ahead and get started. And what I do is, as a minister, I give an overview of each books of the Bible and passages because I study and read them all. And it's like anything, you have to read each book of the Bible yourself, confirm what I feel the Holy Spirit inside me broadcasts to me to give to you. And so we'll go ahead and get started under Jesus Social Hour. These are 15-minute ministries. And so we'll talk about the Old Testament, 31st book, Obadiah. Hope I got that name right. And as nothing is known about the author, this is all in 5 BC, over 500 years before Christ was born. And this prophecy is a bitter cry for vengeance against Enon for its horrendous crimes. And he's yelling out, the kingdom is the Lord, totally Israel and Jerusalem. And during this period of time, the Eamonites, forced from their, ancient home near the Gulf of Achaia, and settled in southern Judah. And they appeared among the adversaries of the Jews returning for exile. And so the Jews were carried off to Babylon for 70 years in captivity. And Cyrus the Great, Iranian, he invaded, overthrew Babylon, and he gave, one of the first things that he did was give the Jews permission to go back to Israel 70 years later and rebuild, Jerusalem, the wall. And as the Jews come back to Jerusalem, not that many, but enough to rebuild the walls, the Eamonites were there and living in the area, and they become enemies of the Jews returning to their homeland. And that's what Obadiah is prophesizing and giving a bitter cry of vengeance against Enoch for their horrendous crimes, persecution of the Jews returning home. And as I mentioned earlier, the cry was, the kingdom is the Lord, not these enemies of the Jews. It's a short book of the Bible, 1 or 2 pages, and that is pretty well my take on it. The other book of the Bible, 32 book of Jonah, it's very, very special. And this is getting into the same 5 BC, 500 years before Christ. And Jonah was another prophet. The people, Hollywood, they like to have the sensation of, because in their script it was he's thrown off a boat and eaten by a whale. But we'll go ahead and get started here. Jonah was a disobedient prophet who attempted to run from his divine commission and took the first boat that he could find and thought he'd sail to Tarshish, which was, they figure, in Spain, maybe England, but nobody really quite sure where Tarshish was. But it was the closest boat that he could find to get away from his mandate by God to go to Assyria, Nineveh, and prophesize, to them. In that boat, big storm came up, and people on the boat, the sailors, they cast Jonah overboard with his permission, and he's swallowed by a big fish. And that's what the Bible talks about, not so much the whale, big fish, but obviously whale was a big fish. And then he knew why, as he was in the belly of the big fish, why God did this. He even told the sailors on the boat, because he was instructed to go to the wicked city of Nineveh, Assyria, and then as he went there, he did, after he got jettisoned from the well, the fish, to the shore, he did do his duty and did journey to Nineveh in Syria, and he yelled and screamed at the village gate. The wicked city listened, all humbled themselves in sackcloth and ashes. And surprisingly enough, for such a wicked army as the Assyrians were, we'll talk about that next week in the next Bible under the book of Nahum, how they were, surprisingly enough, later on with Jesus, one of the first converts to Christianity. So they must have known over 500, 700 years about God. And they, at this particular time, in the 5th century, their king and their people, they all begged for forgiveness to God. And God relented. He did not destroy them because they said they understand their sins. And then Jonah, he complained to God because he spared the Assyrians. And the book of Jonah, even though it's a short passage, it prepared the way for the gospel because it's talking about the salvation of the Jews and the Gentiles, because the Assyrians were Gentiles, and how it all works. Either you're a Jew or you're a Gentile, and God, forgave and blessed, the Gentiles. And then Jonah kind of upset that he didn't destroy Syria, and then he tried to go up and watch the destruction of the city, and then as he sat there, some kind of plant on a gourd covered his head to block the sun, and then the next day God sent a worm and devoured the gourd, the plant, and then Jonah got mad again, and then God reached down and told him, I grew the worm, I grew the, and it's mine, so how can you be upset by Jonah again? And God, chapter 4, verse 10, his verse was, why should I not spare Nineveh, great city, when with more than 6,000 or 60,000 persons that cannot discern between their right hand and their left hand, and also with much cattle. God took pity on Nineveh. Assyria gave his grace and forgive their sins. And we'll see next week in the book of Nahum, and God did come back and completely destroyed, Nineveh, Assyria. But that'd be a Bible story for next week. But this time around, he forgave them. And the very exciting book to me, obviously, to all of us, is the 33 book, Micah. And was a prophet, and he, on the Israelites in Jerusalem, he's a prophet. He attacked the rich, who exploited the poor, the fraudulent merchants, the rural judges, corrupt priests and prophets. And he was, and this book is busted up in 3 parts: the impending judgment of the Lord, Israel's sins; the second part, glory restored Zion; and then and the second part is the Prince of David shall rule over you, reunited Israel. So he gave the people of Israel hope. And in his prayer, in the third level, was prayer of national restoration, God's pardon, mercy, and all those 700 years, 500, 700 years before Jesus. And what, for all of us, this Micah, it's going to be chapter 5, verse 2. It should make us all just hit the ground on our knees and look up the sky and say, God, forgive your sins. Because it spells out, but in this chapter, but you, Bethlehem, Ishmahat. And Ishmahat is another name for Bethlehem in the old days. It was the birthplace of David, even where Rachel died and buried, birthplace of David. Rachel was second wife of Jacob on the Abraham side of the fence. But you, Bethlehem, too small to be among the clans of Judah, and you shall come forth from me, and who is to be ruler in Israel. His origins is from old, from ancient times. Therefore the Lord shall give them up until the time for which she who is to give birth has born. And this is prophesizing Jesus being born 500, 700 years later, and identifying Mary give birth to Jesus. And so only God can talk to a prophet, his voice, and predict 500, 700 years later what's going to happen. And that's the changing from the Old Testament to the New Testament. And here we're seeing in the Micah and this book of the Bible, the prophecy that all Jews, Gentiles, everybody were told that there will become a new ruler in Israel. And obviously, we can think about it, the coming of Jesus to rule over all earth and give judgment. And another passage in the Micah is sacrifice avails nothing without the spirit of religion. Preparations for the New Testament. And so we see, in all 3 different prophets, giving salvation, giving hope to the Jews in captivity, and showing Gentiles and Jews alike that there's forgiveness for God for sins, and you can always come to God and ask for forgiveness. And his heart is beautiful, and his wrath is frightening for the enemies of God. So thank you for letting me give my take on these 3 books of the Bible, the Old Testament. Next week is going to be the 34th book, Nathan, the 35th book, Micah, 36th book, Micah. And I think it's important for next week, especially Nathan, chapter 1, verse 7. The Lord is good, a stronghold in the day of trouble, and he knoweth them that trust in him. So when you love God, he knows you personally. I just keep being reminded about that all the time. Thank you very much. Stephen Choate, Romans7.org.